Welcome to Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay, a shot of truth serum for your investment and insurance questions. I'm Josh Knoll, the owner of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jay Stubbs, Director of the Gulf Coast for Concourse Financial Group. We are brought to you on the Gulf Coast Financial Advisors Podcast Network. Well, today we're going to be discussing the different types of IRAs and how they fit into different situations. So SEPs, traditional IRAs, simple IRAs, Roths, all that. We're also going to do a quick compare and contrast of these IRAs with their group cousins 401k/403b offerings. But before we dive into all of this, let's have our friends from Sloth Racer kick us off. Jay, my friend, how you doing today?
Josh, I'm doing great. Really enjoyed some of this cold front weather that we've had pushed through in our Gulf Coast area. It's been nice to get outside, have a few of those fires started, and enjoying maybe having some relaxation outside instead of baking outside like we normally do.
Yeah, but for those our listeners that are not on the Gulf Coast, when Jay says cold front, what that means is it gets down into kind of the mid 40s in the morning, and then by afternoon, we're in our 70s. We're already at 70 degrees here, and it's 10 a.m. Central Time.
But it's still nice to have the break in the humidity and all of that. It just makes for a nice fall feeling.
Yeah, when I moved down here from Kansas City several years ago, we're moving in, and I've got this stack of coats, and I'm looking around the house trying to figure out where the heck I'm going to put it because there was no coat closet, which in Kansas City, you would never build a house without a coat closet. It'd be kind of silly. So, yeah, you're definitely cooled off a little bit down here. Well, Jay, let me do a little quick housekeeping for compliance, and then we'll dive into our topic. Jay Stubbs and Concourse Financial Group are not affiliated with Prime Capital Investment Advisors, Qualified Plan Advisors, or Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. And Josh Knoll, I'm not affiliated with Concourse Financial Group. All right, Jay, what I want to do today, this is going to be kind of an evergreen topic. The limits that we're going to discuss are going to be for 2021 on these particular plans, so that part will potentially get dated. But the basics are going to stay the same. We're going to talk about what are the individual retirement account options and the different situations where they may come into play. And we're just going to do a light contrast of those options with a 401k, 403b group offerings that sometimes people get them confused with. So I tell you what we'll do first. Let's talk about the broad stroke difference between a 401k/403b and an IRA. And let me set the table for you. 401k and 403b, these are all designated tax lines in the IRS code. 401k is typically a for-profit group plan offering, pre-tax typically, although there are Roth 401k options becoming more prevalent, that you would see from a private employer that allow the employees to contribute on a pre-tax basis into a retirement account, let that build up over time, and then they take it out in retirement. Sometimes they'll roll it into an IRA. 403b would be the nonprofit cousin or equivalent of that. You would see that a lot of times with government employees. They'll have a 403b. There are some fundamental differences. Historically, a 403b up until the mid-70s was designed to be an annuity plan. They kind of lifted those restrictions, I believe, 1974. So they're really, a lot of times when you see the holdings in a 401k and a 403b, nowadays you don't see as many differences as you may have done historically. So that's kind of the groundwork there. So let's talk about how that can contrast to just a broad stroke to an IRA.
Well, the first thing we need to let everybody listening understand is if you are an employee of a entity, whether it's a 501c3 public or non-public entity or a fundraising entity, it might be a church or a school or any nonprofit organization. And then if you're an employee of a regular company, whether private or public, the offering of that employer-sponsored plan would be either of those two options that you just discussed, 401k or 403b. And the mechanics of that, you might have a listener on here that says, well, I just started working. What do I do? I mean, you typically would get to enroll in those plans after you've been with the company, sometimes 90 days, sometimes 6 months. And then you're making a dedicated deduction from your paycheck on a systematic basis that is going to maybe be matched by the employer or the nonprofit. And then it's going into self-directed funds through which you have investment growth. And ultimately, you want to have those funds grow tax deferred. That's the law. Those things grow tax deferred until you hit retirement age. And you can have an early withdrawal time frame of 59 and a half, or you can just say, yeah, I'm just going to make these things available to myself when I'm 65, 66, 67 years old. So the first thing is, yeah, I've got the option. I'm going to make a decision. maybe out of my paycheck every couple of weeks or every month, the funds are going to come out and they're going to go into this plan, and you make the investment decisions, possibly with the assistance of the HR directors at those companies or with the assistance of the investment companies through which those plans are set up. Now, that's at work. You really don't have an option if you're a self-employed person. I mean, you can do a self-employed 401k, but there are really a lot of people just look at it and say, do I want to do both if I'm an employee of a company, or do I not work for a company? I'm an independent contractor and I need to work on my retirement plans myself. That's when we come over and talk about the IRAs, and then the SEPs, is we talk about that independent contractor that owns their own business. So I hope I didn't cloud that up too much, but some people may be saying, aren't they the same thing? Isn't a 401k, doesn't it do the same thing as the IRA? Well, technically, yeah, but there's different contribution limits. You may not be able to get into a 401k if you don't work for a company. You may have to come to talk with an advisor like Josh and get things set up if you are an independent contractor. So just a lot of things to understand, but bare bones minimum. If I have an opportunity to be in a 401k or 403b, I get to make that decision and it's automatically deducted from my paycheck. If I'm doing an IRA, I have to make that decision on an annual basis, what contribution I want to put in, but I can also do that monthly over that period of 1 year.
Very good. Well, and Jay, on that note, so that segues pretty nicely into what you said. If you're a self-employed person, or maybe you have a business with, let's say, 10, 20 employees, or maybe not a ton of employees, got a couple employees, can you do a 401k startup? Sure, absolutely you can. But a lot of times you will see folks leverage, they'll start out the gate with a simple IRA. Now, not to get into all the differences between those two things, but the 401k is going to have a little bit more reporting requirements. It's going to have a little bit more accounting requirements. There's going to be some, typically speaking, there's going to be higher costs associated with the 401k in the beginning, and there's going to be more Department of Labor oversight necessarily for that plan. So a lot of times we'll transition, Jay, to the simple IRA. A lot of times, and I have clients that use simple IRA, they're doing a startup or they're a smaller business, and maybe they don't see a day where they get up to 100 employees, which is the simple IRA limit. And so they say, hey, what is something I can do that is cost efficient, that gives my employees the opportunity to put money away for their retirement, or gives me the opportunity to put money for away retirement. And oh, by the way, I'm geared to invest in my employees. I'm interested in doing a match. So a lot of the differences you're going to see in these IRAs that Jay and I are going to discuss briefly, the simple, the SEP, the traditional, and the Roth, a lot of the differences functionally are going to be with the limits. Now, a simple IRA is set up to be a group plan, but it actually allows for the employees to have their own individual retirement accounts that's generally speaking held under a master account. In that simple IRA, the 2021 limits, which we'll discuss, are going to be $13,500 in pre-tax contributions for 2021. And if you're over 50, you can do what's called a catch-up contribution of up to $3,000. So Jay, in your experience, I know from my side as an advisor, I will use simple IRA a lot of times to get somebody off the ground and running. Hey, let's get in here. The paperwork's not onerous. The fees are not terrible. It's called simple IRA for a reason. It's relatively simple to set up, and it gives you the ability for your employees to put this money away, and it gives you the ability to be the good guy and come in with a match. What you have to do, there's some rules on how you have to match that. But so I know from my advisor standpoint, I see a lot of that. What's been your experience with simple IRA?
Well, it's a perfect setup for somebody whose business is doing well and they are the owner operator of that business, but yet they don't want to jump through all the hoops of setting up the true qualified plan 401k. And like you just said, there are more reporting requirements. There's some testing that needs to be handled, especially if they've got other employees. But the simple is a great place to start for the guy or gal that's doing well, good cash flow. They know they need to be setting money away for retirement, and they want to do a fairly decent chunk. $13,500 is a fairly decent chunk in 2021 dollars. If you're over age 50, the guideline jumps up $3,000. So that's a nice plug, and we've got technically 15 years if we're over the age of 50 where we can pop away $16,500 and do that on a consistent and regular basis. And it's a great opportunity for those people that don't have a existing qualified plan established or don't have access to one, and they understand, okay, I need to put some money away. It's a great point. And then the others, the employees, the ones that maybe help them build the business to where it is today, they're appreciative because they get access to a qualified plan.
Yep, very good. And so, Jay, that transitions now to SEP, because you just said something there, $13,500 with $3,000 catch-up. That is a big number. However, Let's say that you're a small business owner and you live a certain lifestyle. Let's say even maybe you've gotten to our age and it's taken this long to kind of get to that point to where your business is really profitable. And you look at that 13.5 number, and even with the 3,000 catch up maybe on the distant horizon, you think there is no way I'm going to be able to fund my lifestyle putting away that amount of money a year, right? Even though to all due respect, it's a good chunk of change for most people. You're sitting there saying, I've got a certain lifestyle that is, 2, 3, 400,000 possibly. What are my options if I want to contribute more in a tax deferred environment, pre-tax with tax deferral? What options do I have? Well, that would be the SEP. Now, SEP stands for Simplified Employee Pension Plan. I think that can be a little confusing. I prefer to just call it SEP IRA because a lot of times people see that pension thing and they think, oh, I'm setting up a pension. There's going to be a guaranteed amount coming out the back end. No. Everything we're talking about with these IRAs and the 401k and the 403b, these are defined contribution plans. What does that mean? It means that you know the amount of money going into the plan because you're the one that picks it. You pick that percentage or you pick that raw dollar amount that goes into the plan. You don't know exactly what's going to come out the other end. And a lot of times that's going to depend on how long have you been investing, what is your risk tolerance in the funds that you've put in, what's the market performance been during that time. But either way, you can make some educated and reasonable projections for where you may be sitting down the road, but you don't know for absolute certainty as you would with a typical pension plan, which would be called a defined benefit. Defined benefit is going to tell you, hey, this is exactly how much you're going to be getting per month or per year for however much time period your life or joint life or whatever it may be. Those are set on actuarial tables, and that is a defined benefit. A lot of times people would, in the private sector, would know that by an annuity, an income annuity. So, Jay, on a SEP, the contribution limits are significantly more. However, the employer contribution to the employees jumps up as well. With a simple, generally speaking, we'll see a simple employer will do a 3% match for their employees. Now, there's ways they can jangle around that, as long as they do certain things 2 out of 5 years. But generally speaking, they're just going to call it 3%, let it roll, and go with it. A SEP allows the employer to contribute up to $58,000 for 2021 limits, but it also says, hey, you've got to match up to 3% of your employees' annual contribution, and you can contribute up to 25% of their employee salary, all the way up to $58,000 if you've got a highly compensated employees. The point of me telling you that is, generally speaking, we usually see SEPs with smaller, closely held companies. A lot of times we see it with husband and wife companies where they are trying to sock away as much as they can, not only for their future income needs and retirement, but also because they've got a healthy tax bill hitting them every year. Jay, what's been your experience with SEPs?
Not as great as the simples, but I am very familiar with the environment in which you're speaking, only because that person that comes in, it does, and we talked about profitable business. Cash flow is good. They really don't like the tax bill they pay each and every year, and they understand that there is a need for growing money towards retirement, but they can afford to make a larger contribution towards that effort. So that certainly is where the SEP comes into play, and that's a meaningful number. 58,000 as the contribution maximum, that is a meaningful number.
That's got some horsepower.
Yeah. And if you do that over an extended period of time, 10, 15, 20 years, and couple in there with the potential for upside growth rate, then definitely we're looking at potentially a nice bucket of money when retirement age rolls around. And the tax advantages that we get with making that contribution are also extremely attractive, because ultimately we're going to be socking that money away, and that's a pre-tax number.
Right.
So it's very attractive, and people should consider it if it fits their financial plan overall, and really importantly, if they're in a good cash flow situation or position. They can afford to make the contribution on an ongoing basis, and they want that money for a larger bucket down the road.
Right. And, it also allows for them, especially if they've got long-term employees. It's just a great way for a closely held, smaller company. Generally speaking, you'll see SEPs in bigger companies, but generally speaking, you're going to see it in a closely held company, a dedicated number of employees that have been there for a long time, an owner where the business is established, and they're starting to look at, what's my exit plan down the road? How can I sock away as much as I can and help my tax bill now? Because generally speaking, you probably are going to take an income dip when you get into retirement. So hopefully you are deferring the taxes in a pretty marginal high tax environment to a situation where you're in retirement, maybe not drawing as much income out. Before I transition to the other IRAs, Jay, the one thing we want to make sure to compare and contrast is the 401k limits again, for 2021 is $19,500. So if you remember on the simple, it was $13,500. The SEP was $58,000. And then the 401k allows those for 50 or older to do a catch-up contribution of $6,500. So all these numbers we're telling you are going to go up slightly in 2022. I don't want to get too much into Nerdville on this podcast. The basic premises of these have been around for many, many years on how these things are set up. All right, so Jay, let's transition to, generally speaking, the limits is going to make it feel like a smaller option, but a traditional IRA is a lot of times what you will see someone use as a rollover IRA for their 401k or 403b buckets of money. So when we tell you the contribution limits for a traditional IRA, a couple of notes to go with that. One, a traditional IRA doesn't have some of the employee requirements of the simple IRA, nor does it have some of the matching requirements of the SEP or the simple. It's just a standalone traditional individual retirement account. It allows you to put $6,000 in pre-tax per year for 2021 limits with a $1,000 catch-up 50 or older. Now, you hear that number and you think, well, what the heck good does that do me? Because a lot of times, and I'll kick it to you, Jay, a lot of times the traditional IRA is what we're going to use as our bucket to roll 401k dollars over when someone is retiring and coming out of that group setting into an individual retirement account. And in a rollover situation, there's no limit on, well, there probably is an upper limit, but there's no limit on most 99.9% of people are going to come into that where they can roll their 401k over into the traditional IRA.
Yeah, we see a lot of that. We see, obviously, if it's a good fit, we see rollovers into annuity products to generate income. We see rollovers into annuity products that have upside potential for growth. And again, making the compliance disclosure here, you have to sit down with somebody like yourself, Josh, and make sure that those types of products are a good fit for you. But as an individual wanting to sock money away for their retirement, they hear the number 6,000, they hear the number 7,000 if they're 50 and older in 2021, and that's just not a big number, but they will have, every dollar counts. To plug our own little podcast story here, every dollar counts, and it's good to have that savings discipline to be able to make that contribution. It is a tax-advantaged contribution. If we're making a contribution to the IRA under current tax law, we get that as a deduction and when we're filing our taxes for that calendar year. So you see a lot of people making the push and running on you and making phone calls really quickly to say, oh, Josh, I got to make my 2021 IRA contribution. You have until the filing deadline of the subsequent year, the following year, to make that contribution. And people need to understand, set it up, make the contribution, and then have a discussion of where those dollars go, where they're invested. But it's going to grow tax deferred. And that is a very powerful tool in our country, is tax deferral. And one day, if you have enough money built up, you will have to pay taxes under current tax law on that money that comes out of those plans, unless it's a Roth, which we're going to get to in just a second, I'm sure. But they have to have that conversation with you about, okay, I'm ready to make this contribution. Then it also sets them up for the rollover down the road coming from an employer-sponsored plan, either 401k or 403b.
Well, and Jane, on that note, often you will see people wait until they retire to do the 401k into the IRA rollover. Now, the question we get a lot in our practice is, do I have to wait until my employment ends? Well, not necessarily. A lot of times a 401k plan will have what's called an in-service withdrawal procedure. And you'd say, well, why would I want to take money out of my 401k and roll it into an IRA while I'm still actively employed and still contributing to it? Well, it's a case-by-case, individualized question and basis. One of the broad reasons I can tell you is sometimes as you get into the retirement red zone, as we've talked about and many times on this podcast, is you have spent 15, 20, 30, maybe 40 years building up this 401k balance. And now you're in the situation where you're starting to prepare for landing. You can see the landing strip and you are starting to buckle your seatbelt and you're thinking, man, I don't necessarily need to worry about risking this bucket of money to a huge degree as I start prepare for landing for retirement. I want to have this under my care, my custody, and my control. So the IRA can, again, I want to be careful, like you said, Jay, earlier with compliance. Generally speaking, if you go into you roll into an IRA and you've got a qualified advisor helping you, you'll get more personalized options. You'll get a little bit more personal care. A lot of times you'll have a little bit more diversification because 401k plans tend to be a little bit more set it and forget it. A lot of times you'll see target date based funds in there. Nothing wrong with them. It's just as you're getting closer, and particularly if you're somebody that's really socked away and dedicated their life to saving this amount of money, it's one of those ways where you can put that into your care, custody, control if your 401k plan allows for it. So Jay, we'll save the last 401k here for the kissing cousin The one that is directly related to the other IRA types, but kind of stands on its own to a certain degree, and that's a Roth IRA. So you and I both are fans of the Roth. A Roth IRA allows you to put in contributions post-tax. So everything we just laid out to you, the 401k, the 403b, the SEP, and the simple, these are all pre-tax contributions. They grow tax deferred. Then when you take out distributions in retirement, no earlier than 59 and a half without a penalty, no later than 70 and a half. I believe that's moving to 72.
It has moved to 72.
So, thank you. Moved to 72 for required minimal distributions, RMDs. Nonetheless, whenever you start taking those distributions, you're going to be taxed at whatever your income tax rate is at that point in time when you're starting to take those. The Roth, by contrast, allows a post-tax contribution. The money will grow tax-free. And when you take out distributions in retirement, 59 and a half, starting, you have no additional income taxes due at that time. So Roth limits are $6,000. The Roth limits match the traditional IRA, $6,000 with a $1,000 catch-up for 2021. Jay, what's been your experience? I know we both have done with our clients. We've worked with Roth quite a bit. What's been your experience? What do you think of them?
Well, it's the first thing that we share with people that they need to make a contribution is if you are under roughly $200,000 in joint household income and you would like to have the option or you want to make a contribution to a IRA or a Roth IRA, we suggest, or I suggest, if it fits within their financial plan and the scope of their objectives, to look at the Roth first because of the tax-free growth and the tax-free in nature of the income when you hit retirement age, over age 59 and a half. Anytime that you can have the establishment of a tax-free bucket of income, that's very powerful. So you could have the upside potential of the growth of the dollars inside the Roth, and at some point down the road, you can pull money out and not have to worry about a tax burden under current tax law on those monies coming out to fund your retirement. There are some news stories you can go out and Google. I think some of the startup companies, founders of different startup companies you may have heard of, they did a Roth IRA, and their only investment inside of that was their own company stock. Now that company stock has gone public, and it's worth millions and millions of dollars inside of a Roth IRA. They get to pull that money out income tax free.
Right.
But again, you have a household income limit threshold. And I think that's roughly $200,000 as a phase out. I don't have the numbers right here in front of me, but if you make more than $200,000,
married couple,
as a married couple, then Roth is not an option. But if you're an individual or if you're a married couple and you're in the $100,000, $125,000, $150,000, $175,000 range, then Roth is a great place to start putting money towards your retirement.
Right. And we don't want to dive into the topic now because we're running out of time, but if you are past the Roth IRA income limits, but you have interest in tax-free growth, Jay and I did, I don't know exactly which episode number it was, Jay, but we did a conversation, I believe we titled it Rich Man's Roth, where we talk about some of the options available to those that like the Roth IRA features but do not qualify for it because of their income that they have coming in. So, all right, Jay, to wrap it up, we went through the different types of IRAs. That was simple IRA, that was SEP, traditional IRAs, what some people call a rollover IRA, and then the Roth. And then we also compared and contrasted that with the 401k and its public sector sister cousin 403b. And also we didn't dive into the Roth 401k, but basically Roth 401k functions very similar to a Roth IRA. It's just offered in a group setting. I don't know about you, but years ago I didn't see a whole lot of those. It seems to be popping up more and more popular. In fact, we see a lot of our pre-retirees coming in where they've basically put half of their contribution into the Roth 401k to kind of to have a hedge against future higher income tax limits. Jay, I'll give you a final word and we'll wrap it up.
Well, what we really didn't discuss, we may have glossed over it, is once you make your contribution, 401k, 403b, SEP, simple 401k, IRA or Roth IRA, the individuals or the family then needs to have a conversation with somebody like you that says, okay, now the dollars are in there, what do we do with them? You need to go through a risk tolerance profile and have a discussion with an advisor that says, where do I want these dollars to be placed for investment growth? How do I need to allocate towards different investment styles? What's my time frame or my time horizon till where I'm going to need the money? People will need to understand just putting the dollars in there, that's fine. We've got that first thing done. The second thing is make the investment decisions. And that's where we have to sit down with an investment advisor, do our due diligence, and make sure that the types of investment vehicles we're going into are appropriate for our own risk and ultimately what our objectives are towards retirement.
Right. And final note is, the best time to start investing in any of these is either 20 years ago or today. So, don't hesitate if you've got the ability, you've gotten to a point where you can start putting it away. time value of money, compound interest, this all plays a part. And you would be surprised at how far even a Roth, a maxed out Roth, 20 years in, that with typical market performance, you'd be surprised at what you could actually accumulate. So main thing is try to, if you've got interest in these things, you want to have another conversation about or further conversation about it. My practice, Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, we do both the 401k group offerings. We also do all the IRA offerings that we discussed here. You can continue the conversation by reaching out, calling us at 251-327-2124, or you can visit our website, gulfcoastfa.com. That's FA as in financialadvisor.com. On that website, you'll actually find a risk tolerance questionnaire up in the upper right-hand corner if you want to see where you stand. Most people think that they are either more conservative or more risky than they are. I've never actually seen the number land perfectly where they thought it would be. It's always an interesting conversation. While you're there, you can make an appointment on our Calendly app. And then, of course, to all you independent and semi-independent advisors and agents out there listening and interested into what the value that Jay Stubbs could bring to your practice like he does mine, you can find him at jstubbs.com. That's JAYSTUBBS.com. All right, my friend, another show in the can. I want to thank you, my co-host, Jay Stubbs. Many thanks to our producer, Johnny Gwynn, down here in Deep Fry Studios. We're actually not sitting in a sauna today, which means it definitely is cooled off outside.
Absolutely. It's so nice out there. And I hope all of you are, as we don't time stamp our episodes, but as you get closer and closer to the holidays, spending time with your loved ones, you also have to remember the holidays are the time where everybody needs to just chill out and relax and take things a little bit easier. Don't let it all stress you out. And also get ready for 2022, because based on what I'm seeing, it's going to be a heck of a year.
Yeah, and set up your IRA. This is a great time to set up. You have a little bit longer time period on some of this stuff with your tax filing than you think, but definitely time to have that conversation. It doesn't take as long as you think. So again, thank you all that have joined Jay and I on this journey. And to those of you who are joining us now, do me a favor, please subscribe on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, you would be doing us a huge favor if you would rate and review the show. It helps other listeners like you find us. Lastly, you like the show music? Go check out slothracerband.com. That's slothracerband.com. And they're going to take us home now. This has been Every Dollar Counts with Josh and Jay. Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, PCIA, a federally registered investment advisor. PCIA, doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management, PCWM, and Qualified Plan Advisors, QPA. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is independent of Prime Capital Advisors. Information presented for educational purposes only, is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. All investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, be sure to consult a tax professional before implementing any tax or investment strategies.